Dark Souls 2 arrives next month, offering a neck-snapping twist on the famously impenetrable franchise. And whether you're a series noob wondering what all the fuss is about, or if you've been down since Demon's Souls, you need to know what's new. Here are 7 reasons why Dark Souls 2 is different. Let's start in the most sensible place, the beginning. If you've played the previous 2 games, you'll know how it's meant to start, with your crushing brutal death at the hands of some hideous monster. Dark Souls 2 is different though. In an attempt to draw in a wider audience, the opening moments are more sedate, even to the point that the creatures you first encounter run away from you. This may be considered a false sense of security, given that the game might actually be harder, but it's certainly a gently beckoning finger compared to the original game's fist to the throat. On a similar note, the second reason is that you now have more control over your choice of character. Instead of the cryptic trinkets on offer in Dark Souls 1, the 7 starting gifts in the sequel are more obviously labelled. And if you want, you can make the game more difficult by choosing the bonfire aesthetic. By burning these, you instantly make the game tougher. That's not all though. You'll also have the option to reset your character using a soul vessel, which allows you to completely revise your stats and class. Death is also different in Dark Souls 2, and if anything, it's even more severe than before. Every time you die, your HP meter shrinks slightly, reducing it by a total of 50%, meaning that the exploratory suicide runs of Dark Souls are less viable than before. This makes an already hard game even harder, and means that your choice of path must be more carefully plotted. Thankfully, you can burn human effigies to increase your HP, but they are preciously rare, and in that cruel Dark Souls way, they have crucial other uses as well, something that we'll come back to in a bit. Our fourth difference is with invasions. In the original Dark Souls, you ran the risk of invasion while online in human form, but you always had the safety net of being immune when you were hollowed. In the sequel, however, you can be invaded at any time. The chances of this are determined by your sin level, which in turn is determined by how often you invade other people's worlds. So the simple mantra is don't invade others if you don't want to be invaded yourself. And if you really don't want to be disturbed, you can burn human effigies to prevent enemy players from invading at all. And yes, those are the same effigies you use to restore your rapidly diminishing HP. There's a further risk to invading other people's worlds though. It's possible to lose more than 50% of your health if you serially invade other worlds and your sin level is high enough. But you know, that probably serves you right. Another way Dark Souls 2 is different is with levelling. Much like the previous 2 games, you launch many of your probably doomed operations from a hub world, this time called Majula. This is basically the equivalent of the Nexus or the Firelink Shrine, and it's here you come back to level up. The difference here is that levelling up is apparently more difficult. A recent hands-on suggested that you need 901 souls to level up, with a basic grunt enemy giving you only 30. Again, this makes the prospect of losing those souls less desirable than ever. We've heard talk of Dark Souls 2 being more accessible, but it certainly isn't easier. That basically means that many of the systems have been streamlined. Voice chat is now available for players who use co-op, which to us feels a little bit less Dark Soul-y than a gracious bow upon meeting a fellow adventurer. Summoning other players is now also easier, giving you an increased chance of joining a friend if you both choose the same god to follow. Again, to some this might diminish the organic feeling of teamwork that the previous game had. Finally, we've got fast travel, which lets you jump between bonfires from the start of the game. Previously, you'd only be able to do this around halfway through the game by getting the Lord Vessel. And, given that this significantly decreases the risk to your character from rushing about, we'd venture that this does make elements of the game slightly easier. And that leads us on to our final difference, which is difficulty itself. The intention here is to clearly ease in new players, but still challenge the pros, and this is reflected in what we've already seen. Now, this being a Dark Souls game, you expect every enemy to provide a new type of threat as standard, but there's more to it than that. This time you start the game with a single swig on offer from your life-restoring Estus flask, as opposed to the previous 5. In addition, you can also pick up life-restoring gems, which gradually heal you, but they slow down your pace as a result. So restoring life is definitely more difficult, but there's a more obvious spike in difficulty in the shape of the Pursuer. This huge, fast, deadly enemy is reminiscent of Nemesis from Resident Evil 3. He can be dropped in almost anywhere by his massive eagle buddy, and the additional challenge will come from working out where and why he's going to attack you. And you should bear in mind that this is just a taster of the unspeakable horrors yet to come. You can expect things to get much, much worse. Well, that's all we've got to now, but please subscribe to CVG for more coverage of Dark Souls 2 when the game is released on March the 14th.